Welcome to Stillwater Chronicles. Tonight, we settle into a story about a face that looked out from a house that burned before its time. There are places that hold their breath, not in the way a room holds breath when an argument has just ended, or the way a church holds it during the long pause before a hymn begins. This is something older, something slower, the kind of stillness that has had decades to settle into the walls, into the wood, into the stone, until it no longer feels like absence of sound, but a presence of its own. Patrick had felt it before, in certain old buildings. He was used to it. It was, in a way, part of the job. He had driven 4 hours that morning from Lyon, through rolling farmland, and along roads that narrowed gradually, as though the countryside were trying to keep the destination to itself. The estate sale had been listed in a small, regional circular, a single paragraph, almost apologetic in its brevity. The last of a family line, a farmhouse in the hills, furniture and effects to be sold, no date of death given, no family name. He had photographed the listing and not thought about it again until he was already in the car. The farmhouse sat at the end of a long gravel track, flanked by plane trees that had grown so tall and so close together that the light came through them in pale, broken columns, like the nave of a cathedral that had forgotten it was outdoors. The house itself was stone, the kind of old, patient stone that seemed to have absorbed every season it had ever lived through and was simply waiting to absorb a few more. The shutters were open. The front door stood ajar. A woman from the notair's office was already there, sitting in a fold-out chair near the entrance with a clipboard and a thermos of coffee she did not offer to share. She glanced at Patrick with mild professional disinterest, took his name, and gestured toward the interior with a pen. "Take your time," she said. "There is no rush." He thanked her and stepped inside. The farmhouse smelled of old paper and stone dust, and something faintly floral that he could not place. Lavender, perhaps, or something that had once been lavender and was now only the memory of it. The rooms were large and low-ceilinged, with thick walls that kept the summer heat outside and held instead a kind of cool, even dimness. Long tables had been arranged through the ground floor, laden with the accumulated objects of a life. Crockery, stacked in unsteady towers. Bundles of letters tied with disintegrating ribbon. A clock that had stopped at 3:20 and seemed unlikely to be persuaded otherwise. Patrick moved through the room slowly, the way he always did. He was not in a hurry. He had learned over the years that the good pieces rarely announced themselves. They waited. They sat among ordinary things, with a patience that almost resembled shyness, and you had to earn them by looking carefully and without expectation. He touched things lightly as he passed. A brass candle holder, a ceramic jug with a hairline crack along one side, a chair with cabriole legs that had been repainted so many times the original color was unknowable. He made notes in a small leather book. He did not rush. In the third room, what had once been, he thought, a sitting room of some kind, he found the shoeboxes. There were 3 of them, stacked on a low table near the window, their lids slightly askew in the way of things that have been gone through and not quite put back. He lifted the first lid and found letters. The second held receipts and official papers, the kind that accumulate around a life without ever quite representing it. The third held photographs. He sat down on a nearby chair, testing it first, as he always did, and placed the shoebox on his knee. The photographs were black and white, formal in the style of the 1950s. That particular stiffness in the posture, that careful arrangement of the subject in relation to the camera, as though the photograph were something you prepared for, rather than something that simply happened. Families on front steps, a woman in a good dress standing in a garden, children in a row, oldest to youngest, squinting against the sun. The quality of light in them was the quality of a different world, harder somehow, more serious, with none of the softness that color photography would later learn to produce. Patrick went through them, one by one, holding each briefly before setting it aside. He was not looking for anything in particular. He never was. It was simply the habit of his attention, thoroughness for its own sake, the small discipline of actually looking at a thing before moving on. The photograph was near the bottom of the box. It was a formal portrait. A family, 6 people, arranged in the way families arrange themselves for formal portraits. The father seated in the center, the mother to one side, children disposed around them with varying degrees of willingness. Behind them, a large stone fireplace. On the mantelpiece, a clock, not unlike the one he had noticed in the hallway, stopped at 3:20. The room was this room. He recognized the window. He looked at it for a long moment without knowing precisely what was drawing his attention. The family themselves were unremarkable, pleasant, composed, the expressions of people who understood that a photograph was a document and had behaved accordingly. The father looked like someone who had worked hard and expected others to as well. The mother looked like someone who held things together without being thanked for it. The children ranged in age from perhaps 4 to 15, and they all had the slightly dazed look of children who had been told to be still for longer than was comfortable. None of this was what held him. What held him was the door. In the background of the photograph, behind the family, set back in the far wall, there was a doorway. It led, he could see, into another room, darker, with what appeared to be a table, and the lower half of a window. An ordinary interior doorway, the kind that exists in the background of countless photographs, and is never the point. But in the doorway, half in shadow, half in light, was a face, not one of the family. Not a servant or a visitor posed for the photograph. Someone standing in the doorway, slightly too far back to be fully visible, partially obscured by the doorframe in the dimness of the room behind. You might have missed it entirely. Patrick almost had. He didn't miss it. He tilted the photograph toward the window. The afternoon light fell across it at a slight angle, and the face in the doorway came into sharper focus. He looked at it for a very long time. The jaw was his jaw. The same line, the same slight asymmetry on the left side that he had always disliked in photographs of himself. The eyes, even in the flat gray of old film, were his eyes. The same slightly heavy brow. The same tilt to the head that his mother had always called stubborn, and his wife called thoughtful, depending on her mood. And above the left eyebrow, small but unmistakable in the contrast of black and white, a pale mark, a scar, the shape of a scar he had carried since he was 9 years old. when a cycling accident on a gravel track had sent him over the handlebars and introduced him, briefly and violently, to the ground. He sat very still. The room around him was quiet. The clock on the mantelpiece, the real one, in the real room, ticked once and then did not tick again, as though it too was holding itself still. Patrick turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written, Famille Aubert, été 1958. The Aubert family. Summer 1958. He was born in 1974. He turned the photograph back over and looked at the face in the doorway again. It looked back. He was aware, dimly, of the sounds of the house. The creak of a floorboard somewhere above him. The distant murmur of the woman with the clipboard shifting in her chair. The soft movement of the plane trees outside, in a wind he hadn't noticed when he arrived. These sounds did not quite reach him. They existed at the edge of his attention, on the other side of something. He thought, there is a rational explanation for this. He thought, family resemblances travel in strange ways. Genes skip and echo and surface in unexpected places. A stranger can wear your face without knowing it. The photograph is 80 years old and shot in a format that flattens and simplifies. And a face in a doorway at that resolution is little more than a suggestion of a face. And what he was seeing was the face his mind was primed to see, because the mind is always searching for itself in things. All of this was reasonable. He knew it was reasonable. He also knew the scar. He set the photograph down on the arm of the chair and stood up and walked to the window. The plane trees moved in the light. The gravel track stretched away between them, pale and quiet, toward a road he could no longer see. The afternoon was the kind that feels as though time has paused, not stopped, but paused. As a breath is paused, as a sentence is paused before its final word. He thought about going to find the woman with the clipboard. He thought about asking her about the Aubert family, who they were, what had become of them, whether there were any records, any survivors. He thought about explaining what he had found. He rehearsed the conversation in his mind and heard how it would sound and decided, quietly, not to have it. He went back to the shoebox instead. He went through the remaining photographs carefully, one by one. There were perhaps 30 more family portraits, a picnic in a field, a wedding with a very large hat, a child on a bicycle, squinting at the camera with the particular expression of a child who would rather be doing something else. The face in the doorway did not appear in any of the others. He went back to the other shoeboxes. He went through the letters, though his French was functional rather than fluent, and the handwriting of the 1950s was not designed for easy reading. He found references to the house, its upkeep, its difficulties, the cost of the roof, the trouble with the lower field. He found references to the family, births and illnesses, and the ordinary movements of ordinary lives. He found, near the bottom of the second box, a single sheet of paper that was not a letter, but a document, official, stamped, the language of it formal, in the way that official language becomes formal when it is saying something irrevocable. He couldn't read all of it, but he could read enough. The house, this house, the house he was sitting in, had burned in the autumn of 1961. The cause was listed as undetermined. There had been no survivors. Patrick sat for a while after that, without moving. The afternoon light shifted slightly in the room, the sun moving behind a cloud, or moving simply because afternoons move, because time does not actually pause, even when it feels that way. The quality of the light changed from warm to cool, and then, slowly, back again. He thought about the shape of a coincidence. He thought about how many photographs existed in the world, and how many faces existed in photographs, and how many of those faces resembled other faces across other decades, because there are only so many arrangements a human face can make, and sometimes the arrangements repeat. He thought about all of this, and held it carefully, and tried to find it convincing. He looked at the photograph one more time. The family looked back. The father, composed. The mother, holding things together. The children, slightly dazed. The fireplace. The clock at 3:20. And in the doorway, in the dimness, the face. Looking out at him with an expression he recognized the way you recognize something you have never been told but have always, somehow known. Not surprised. Not afraid. Not even quite curious. Patient, as if it had been waiting in that doorway for a long time. As if it had known, in some way that did not require explaining, that he would eventually come. Patrick placed the photograph carefully back in the shoebox and put the lid on. He bought 3 pieces of furniture that day. A side table with a drawer that stuck, a mirror with a foxed and clouded glass, and the chair with the cabriole legs. He did not buy the shoebox. He did not buy anything from the room with the fireplace. He drove back through the plane trees and along the narrowing roads, and eventually onto the motorway. And by the time Lion appeared on the horizon, the afternoon had become evening, and the sky had gone from pale gold to the particular deep blue that arrives just before dark. He did not think about the photograph on the drive home, or if he did not allow himself to name it. It was only later, much later, in the middle of the night, in the familiar dark of his own room, with the familiar sounds of the city outside and his wife's quiet breathing beside him, that the thought surfaced, slow and certain, the way things surface from deep water. The house burned in 1961. No survivors. No survivors. And yet, the face was there, in the photograph, in the doorway, looking out. He raised his hand in the dark and touched the scar above his left eyebrow, the small raised line of it, familiar as his own name. He had always assumed he knew where it came from. He lay in the dark for a long time. And somewhere, 4 hours south, in a stone farmhouse that had stood empty for 60 years and was being slowly returned to the world, a shoebox sat on a low table by a window. Inside it, beneath 30 other photographs, a face looked out from a doorway in the summer of 1958. Still patient, still waiting, as though the matter were not yet finished, only paused, the way a breath is paused, the way an afternoon is paused, the way some things remain in doorways, long after the rooms behind them have turned to ash. Thank you for listening to Stillwater Chronicles, where even the oldest photographs can carry a secret. If this stillness stayed with you, if the face in that doorway, settled somewhere behind your eyes. Then let it remain a little while longer. Some things wait a very long time to be found. Rest now. Whatever is looking out from the dark has always known where you are.